When my fiancé's mother looked me in the eyes and called me just a seamstress, she had no idea that I held the power to destroy their entire $50 million facade. Elena Whitford had never been ashamed of her work. Her small boutique in Boston was her pride, a place where brides came with nervous smiles and left glowing in gowns she had carefully stitched by hand. She wasn't rich, but she had built something honest with her own effort. That was enough for her, until she met Caleb Prescott. Caleb swept into her life like a promise of something bigger. Charming, attentive, carrying the confidence of someone who had grown up surrounded by wealth. He came from a family that ran a well-known charity organization, a name that appeared often in society pages, praised for its generosity. Elena thought she was lucky to be welcomed into such a world, but the welcome was thin. His mother, Vivian Prescott, wasted no time showing her disdain. Vivian's words were sharp, always delivered with a smile that carried poison beneath. She questioned Elena's upbringing, her business, even her manners at the dinner table. At first, Elena tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just nerves, that Vivian would warm up with time. That hope faded quickly. At an engagement gathering, Vivian leaned close enough for only Elena to hear and whispered, "You're just a seamstress." Caleb deserves a woman who can stand beside him, not someone who belongs in a shop full of fabric scraps. The words stung, but Elena kept her expression steady. She had faced long nights alone at her sewing machine, clients who paid late, and the fear of losing her dream more times than she could count. Vivian thought her insult had landed, but what she had really done was strike a spark. Elena looked around at the elegant room, at Caleb laughing easily with guests, at Vivian holding court like a queen, and something inside her shifted. Vivian believed Elena was powerless, small, and easy to dismiss. What she didn't know was that Elena had already noticed cracks in their perfect image. Cracks she was willing to follow, stitch by stitch, until the whole family tapestry came undone. The engagement dinner was held in one of the most expensive halls in Boston. Chandeliers sparkled above, tables were covered in crystal glassware, and servers moved quickly with trays of wine. Elena felt nervous, but tried to remind herself that she belonged there because she was with Caleb. He had asked her to marry him, and she had said yes, believing love could bridge the distance between their worlds. For a while, things went smoothly. Guests congratulated them, raising glasses and offering smiles. Elena stayed close to Caleb, trying to keep her posture steady as conversations swirled around. But she could feel Vivian's eyes on her, sharp and unkind. When the moment came, it cut deeper than Elena expected. Vivian stood, glass in hand, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. She congratulated her son, and then turned toward Elena with a thin smile. "Caleb," she said, "we all admire your generous heart. Only you would choose a woman who makes her living with needles and thread. A gold digger in stitches and fabric, how unique." Laughter rippled through the table, awkward and strained. Some guests looked down at their plates, uncomfortable. Elena felt her chest tighten, her cheeks burning. She tried to glance at Caleb, waiting for him to defend her, to say something, anything. But he didn't. He stayed silent, sipping his wine, his jaw tight but his eyes avoiding hers. The silence was louder than Vivian's insult. It was as if Caleb's choice not to defend her confirmed everything his mother had just implied. Elena forced herself to keep a calm face, though inside her stomach turned. The pain of being humiliated was heavy, but the betrayal of Caleb not speaking up cut deeper. As the dinner went on, Elena sat quietly, watching and listening. Vivian moved easily among the wealthy guests, laughing, boasting about donations, and praising the Prescott family's charity. Yet, behind her words, Elena noticed something odd. Vivian mentioned projects that didn't sound concrete. Schools supposedly built overseas but with no names or details, shelters that were in the works for years without progress. Each story was vague, spoken with a polished smile, but lacking substance. Then came the spending. Vivian bragged about a new property she and her husband had purchased in the Hamptons. Caleb's sister showed off a diamond bracelet, saying it was a gift from the foundation gala. Elena caught the phrasing and filed it away in her mind. Why would personal luxuries be tied to a charity meant to help others? The evening became a blur of polished lies wrapped in expensive suits and designer gowns. Elena smiled when expected, nodded when spoken to, but inside, she was piecing things together. Vivian thought she was small, someone to be mocked in front of strangers. Caleb's silence showed her she could not rely on him. But if Vivian and her family thought she wasn't smart enough to notice the cracks in their perfect image, they were wrong. Elena left the dinner hurt, but more alert than ever. Something about their wealth didn't add up, and she would not ignore what she had seen. She had been embarrassed in front of everyone, but that moment lit a quiet fire. If they believed she was powerless, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Days after the engagement dinner, Elena sensed a change in Caleb. He was present but distant, his words shorter, his attention divided. Vivian's presence in their lives grew heavier. She called often, always with comments that carried judgment wrapped in politeness. Caleb listened more than he pushed back, and Elena began to notice the way his eyes shifted when his mother spoke. One afternoon, Elena arrived at the Prescott home earlier than she was supposed to meet Caleb for a lunch outing, but the house was quiet when she stepped inside. Voices floated from the study, and she paused, the door slightly open. Vivian's tone was sharp but controlled. "Caleb," she said, "you must think about your future. This marriage cannot happen. She is not our kind of people. A woman who runs a sewing shop cannot stand beside you in society. You need a partner who strengthens this family, not one who weakens it." Elena's chest tightened, her hand frozen on the doorknob. The words hit her harder than she expected, not because she hadn't heard Vivian's disapproval before, but because it was now so openly spoken. Caleb's response came after a pause. His voice was low, almost tired. "I know, Mom. Don't worry. She'll never figure out how things really work. She's harmless." The words felt like a blade twisting inside her. Harmless. That was how he saw her, someone too naive to notice, too small to matter. She pulled her hand back from the door, her body trembling. The sting of Vivian's insults was painful, but Caleb's agreement cut deep. This was the man she thought she would marry, the man who had once spoken to her about building a life together. She walked back quietly, careful not to be heard, her heart pounding in her ears. By the time she stepped outside, she felt cold, her stomach hollow. The betrayal wasn't just Vivian's cruelty. It was Caleb's loyalty to his mother over her. He hadn't defended her, hadn't stood against the constant insults. Instead, he spoke as though she were blind, someone too simple to see the truth right in front of her. As she made her way down the front steps, Elena tried to steady her breath. The memory of Caleb's laughter when they first met, the warmth of his promises, now felt false, like threads pulled loose from fabric until nothing held together. She realized he hadn't chosen her out of love alone. He had chosen her because he thought she would never look deeper, never question the world he lived in. Her heart ached, but behind the ache, something else stirred. Being underestimated carried its own kind of power. Caleb and Vivian believed she was in the dark, but she was not blind. She had seen enough to know something was hidden behind their polished walls and perfect dinners. That night, when Caleb smiled at her as if nothing had happened, she met his gaze with calm silence. He thought she was still the same woman, still trusting, still safe to deceive. But Elena's trust had been broken, and once broken, it would not be given back. She was no longer simply hurt, she was awake. Elena returned to her shop with a heavy heart, but threw herself into her work. Sewing had always been her escape, a place where she could clear her thoughts. Clients trusted her with important gowns and suits, and she treated each piece with care. Among her customers were wealthy women from Boston's higher circles, some of them donors to the Prescott Foundation. They liked to talk while being fitted, their conversations often drifting into gossip about society events and money. One afternoon, while adjusting the hem of a silk dress, a longtime client, Mrs. Harrington, began speaking about a fundraiser she had attended. She complained about how much she had given to the Prescott charity over the years, only to see little evidence of the projects they had promised. "They said they were building a clinic in Haiti," she muttered, "but when I asked for photos or updates, all I got were vague letters. Millions of dollars, Elena, and nothing to show for it. Doesn't that sound strange to you?" Elena kept her face calm, her hands steady with the needle, but inside her mind stirred. It wasn't the first time she had heard something like this. Another client had once mentioned scholarships that never reached students, though she had brushed it off then. Now, with Vivian's insults fresh in her memory and Caleb's betrayal still raw, those comments no longer felt like harmless complaints. They sounded like pieces of a puzzle. The more she listened, the more she began to connect details. Donations always spoke of large sums, but the results seemed invisible. Projects were announced but never completed. The charity's name was everywhere, but there was little proof of real work being done. Elena knew she had to see more. Caleb often invited her to his office, a sleek room filled with documents, ledgers, and neatly stacked folders. He never minded if she waited there while he stepped out for calls. At first, she had sat quietly, flipping through magazines, but now she paid closer attention. Papers left on his desk revealed lists of donors, amounts written in large numbers, but nothing attached to clear outcome. One evening, while Caleb was distracted on the phone in another room, Elena let her eyes wander across a file left open. It contained expense reports, huge payments for operations that looked suspiciously like vacations. She saw entries for luxury resorts, high-end cars, and jewelry, all under the banner of the charity. Her stomach turned. It was not just negligence, it looked like theft. She didn't take anything that night, only memorized what she could, keeping her hands still so Caleb wouldn't notice anything was out of place. But the seed of doubt had already grown into something stronger. Vivian's cruelty, Caleb's betrayal, and now these documents. Everything pointed toward a hidden truth. Elena walked out of the office with her head high, her heart racing. They thought she was harmless, someone who could be insulted and ignored. What they didn't know was that she now had a reason to keep watching, listening, and stitching together every detail until the whole picture was clear. Elena began spending more time in Caleb's office whenever the chance appeared. She no longer looked at the room as a place to wait. It was a doorway into the truth. She studied the files left on desks, glanced at papers tucked inside drawers, and paid attention to anything that looked out of place. The more she saw, the clearer the picture became. The charity was not failing by accident. It was being drained on purpose. Invoices marked as community projects were actually for luxury resorts and yachts. Airline tickets were listed as outreach trips, yet the destinations were private islands. Expensive jewelry and designer clothes showed up as supplies. At first, Elena wondered if she had misunderstood, but the pattern repeated across every file she touched. The charity was a shell, a mask worn to hide greed. The hardest part came when she saw Caleb's name tied to it all. Transfers into his personal accounts were disguised as management fees and honorariums. Luxury purchases in his name appeared alongside his parents' record. The truth settled heavily on her chest. Caleb wasn't just aware of what was happening, he was a part of it. She remembered the night he told his mother she was harmless, the way he brushed off her worth. Now it made sense. He hadn't chosen her for her strength or honesty. He had chosen her because he thought she would never question him, that her love would blind her to the cracks in his family's wealth. Elena replayed their moments together in her mind. The nights he had spoken about building a future, the mornings he had kissed her hand before leaving for work. All of it now felt like layers of a preference. He had wanted a partner who would accept the image, not look beneath it. What he had miscalculated was her ability to see patterns, the same skill that made her an exceptional seamstress. She could look at loose threads and know what the finished piece truly was. Every discovery added to the weight she carried. Vivian's cruelty had been unbearable, but the betrayal lying in Caleb's silence was worse. To know that he saw her as an easy cover, someone who wouldn't challenge the lies, turned love into something bitter. Their engagement ring no longer felt like a symbol of a future. It felt like a chain, a reminder of a trap she hadn't known she'd walked into. Elena no longer saw herself as part of their circle. She moved quietly, careful not to show what she knew, but inside she was building strength. Each document she read, each number she memorized, stitched together a truth that could not be ignored. The Prescotts had built their empire on stolen money, and Caleb was standing in the center of it. Her heart hurt at the thought, but pain sharpened her instead of breaking her. She realized she could not remain the woman they thought she was. If Caleb believed she would remain blind forever, he was about to discover just how wrong he had been. Elena could no longer carry the truth inside her without speaking. One evening, when the house was quiet, she asked Caleb to sit with her. She placed the files she had copied from his desk on the table between them, her hands steady though her heart raced. "I know what your family is doing," she said softly. "I've seen the accounts. The charity is nothing but a cover. How long do you think people will believe these lies?" Caleb leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, she hoped to see regret, some trace of the man she had loved. Instead, his expression hardened. He glanced at the papers, then looked back at her with something close to pity. "This is how power works, Elena," he said flatly. "Money doesn't move honestly in this world. My parents taught me that. If you can't handle it, then maybe you don't belong with me." The words sank like stones in her chest. She had expected excuses or denials, but the coldness in his voice crushed her more than anything else. He didn't even try to hide the truth. He believed in it. To him, corruption wasn't shameful, it was survival. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself not to cry. "You let me think this was love," she whispered. He shrugged, almost indifferent. "You're useful to me, Elaine. You keep me grounded. You look good on my arm. But don't mistake that for being my equal." The sentence shattered whatever pieces of her heart still held hope. She rose quietly, unable to sit any longer. Every step away from him felt heavier, but it also carried a spark of something sharper than pain. The next day, Vivian made sure her cruelty reached its peak. She cornered Elena in the hallway of their home, her voice sweet to anyone passing by but laced with venom meant only for her. "You may think wearing one of your gowns makes you look like you belong, but silk doesn't change the person inside. You're still trash, Elena. Trash and silk." The insult landed like a slap, one that echoed louder because it came after Caleb's betrayal. Vivian's eyes glittered with satisfaction, convinced she had broken her spirit for good. Elena walked away, her steps slow, her face pale, but her mind no longer bent beneath their weight. Pain had reached its peak. She knew then that her revenge could not be small, could not be reduced to angry words or slammed doors. It had to be final. She returned to her boutique that night and sat among the fabrics, breathing in the familiar scent of thread and cloth. Her hands rested on the table, steady once more. Vivian thought she had humiliated. Caleb thought she had no power. But Elena understood something they did not. When people underestimate you, they give you space to plan. Her revenge would not be loud or desperate. It would be sharp, absolute, and undeniable. Elena began moving with quiet purpose. Each time she visited Caleb's office, she memorized numbers, dates, and signatures. She no longer looked at the files with shock. She looked at them as pieces of evidence. Forged receipts, inflated invoices, and donation trails that led to empty accounts. All of it became clear to her careful eyes. She copied what she could, writing details in a notebook she kept hidden beneath rolls of fabric in her shop. The documents told a story the Prescotts never thought anyone would read. Money marked for disaster relief had been used to buy a vacation home. Donations meant for school programs had been spent on jewelry and cars. Elena gathered these threads patiently, careful not to leave signs that anything had been touched. The same skill that helped her stitch gowns with precision now guided her through the quiet collection of secrets. But documents alone would not be enough. She needed people, witnesses who had seen the cracks but lacked proof. Elena thought of her clients, women who often whispered about the Prescott charity during fittings. She began listening more carefully, asking gentle questions, allowing them to share their doubts without ever revealing too much of her own knowledge. One evening, Mrs. Harrington returned for a dress adjustment. Between casual talk about hems and sleeves, she admitted she had stopped donating as much. Too many empty promises, she sighed. Elena's heart quickened. She asked softly, "Did you ever ask for proof?" Mrs. Harrington nodded. Always the same vague answers. "I just assumed I'd never know the truth." Others echoed the same doubts. Donors had given millions, but had never seen photos of projects or clear reports. They had long felt uneasy but lacked the courage or evidence to press harder. Elena carefully encouraged them, not revealing her plan but building their trust. By the time the fittings ended, she knew who might stand with her when the time came. Every insult she had endured played in her memory, sharpening her resolve. Vivian's mocking smile, Caleb's cold words, the laughter of guests at her expense, all of it fed her determination. She understood now that revenge was not about lashing out in anger. It was about taking away the very thing they cherished most, their image of untouchable power. At night, Elena spread her notes across her work table, the same surface where she once cut patterns and pinned fabric. The evidence grew like a new design taking shape, each piece fitting into place until the whole picture was undeniable. She saw clearly what needed to be done. The Prescotts had stitched their empire with lies, but she would unravel it thread by thread until nothing remained. She didn't tell a soul what she planned. Caleb still looked at her with easy confidence, believing she was too soft to act, too blinded by love to fight back. Vivian still sneered when she passed, certain she had broken her spirit. Neither of them saw the storm forming in silence. Elena was done being powerless. Now she was preparing to strike. The night of the gala arrived, brighter and grander than any event before. The Prescott family stood at the center of it, surrounded by chandeliers, velvet curtains, and tables overflowing with fine wine. Wealthy guests filled the hall, all gathered to celebrate the family's so-called generosity. Elena walked in by Caleb's side, her gown simple but elegant, her face calm though her heart beat hard beneath her ribs. The evening began with speeches praising the Prescotts. Vivian shone with pride, greeting donors as if she were royalty. Caleb smiled easily, shaking hands, while his father nodded with quiet authority. To the crowd, they looked flawless, untouchable. Elena kept her silence, waiting. Dinner was served, the air thick with chatter. Then, as though she could not resist one more chance to wound, Vivian turned the spotlight on Elena. She rose with her glass, smiling in that familiar cruel way. "We're so thankful Caleb has chosen someone who reminds us of humility," she announced. "After all, not everyone can climb from sewing tables to ballroom. Some rise higher than their place, don't they, Elena?" A ripple of laughter spread among the guests. Caleb gave a weak smile but said nothing. The sting of humiliation pressed against Elena's chest, but she had come prepared for this very moment. She stood slowly, her movements calm, and turned toward the crowd. Her voice was steady, carrying across the hall. "You've all gathered tonight to honor the Prescott family for their charity," she began. "But before you applaud, I think you deserve to know where your money has really gone." The room fell silent. Vivian's smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. Elena reached into her clutch and unfolded several documents. She held them up, her words sharp and clear. "These are records taken directly from the Foundation's accounts. Millions of dollars donated for schools, hospitals, and relief were spent instead on mansions, yachts, and jewels. This isn't generosity, it's theft." Gasps filled the air, sharp and loud. Guests leaned forward, faces paling as they recognized familiar signatures and figures on the papers. A man near the front muttered, "I gave $500,000 last year," while another woman whispered, I asked for proof, and they lied. The noise grew, a storm of disbelief and anger. Vivian's face turned white, her hands shaking as she tried to laugh it off. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice rising. "She's making it up." But the donors weren't listening. Too many of them had doubts before. Now they had proof. Caleb reached for Elena's arm, his voice low and desperate. "Stop this now," he hissed. But she pulled away, her eyes fixed on him with quiet strength. "You thought I wouldn't see. You thought I was harmless. But I know the truth, Caleb, and so does everyone else now." The gala hall erupted into chaos. Donors shouted for explanations, demanding answers. The Prescotts' polished image cracked before their eyes. Vivian's cruelty and Caleb's arrogance had brought Elena to this point, but it was their own lies that destroyed them. Elena stepped back, calm amid the uproar. For the first time, she felt no shame, no weight on her shoulders. She had spoken, and the truth had struck harder than any insult ever could. The gala ended in uproar. Donors who once praised the Prescotts now demanded explanations, their voices rising with anger. By the next morning, phones rang non-stop, reporters asked questions, and names that once commanded respect were being whispered with suspicion. Within days, several donors announced they were pulling all support. The foundation's accounts were frozen, and investigators were brought in to trace where the money had gone. Elena stayed quiet through it all, watching as the walls began to close in around the family. The Prescotts, who had built their lives on image and reputation, suddenly found both collapsing in public view. Vivian no longer smiled when she walked into a room. Instead, she hid, refusing to face the neighbors who once envied her. Caleb came to Elena late one night, his face pale, his confidence gone. He reached for her hand, his voice low, almost pleading. "Elena, you don't understand what you've done. If you love me, you'll stay quiet now. We can fix this, but you have to stop." She pulled her hand back, her eyes steady on him. "You thought I was just a seamstress," she said softly, her voice cutting through his desperation. "You forgot I can stitch every loose thread into a noose. That's what you gave me, Caleb, threads of your lies. And now they've tightened around you." He flinched at her words, realizing she would not be swayed. For the first time since she had met him, she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing her, but fear of losing everything he had once believed was untouchable. The investigators moved quickly, uncovering years of hidden theft. Vivian's signature appeared on forged receipts, Caleb's name on accounts filled with misused funds. The evidence was undeniable. The empire they had flaunted at galas and in glossy magazines was nothing more than a pile of stolen wealth, and it collapsed piece by piece under the weight of the truth. Vivian faced public disgrace. Neighbors whispered behind her back, friends turned away, and the same society she had once ruled shut its doors. Caleb was implicated directly, his involvement exposed in headlines that painted him not as a rising star but as a fraud. Elena did not celebrate loudly. She didn't need to. Watching the Prescotts lose the respect and power they had guarded so fiercely was more than enough. She had been humiliated, insulted, and dismissed. But now those same people who had laughed at her whispers of not belonging looked at her with respect they couldn't put into words. For Elena, it wasn't about revenge in the shallow sense. It was about balance. They had stolen from others while stepping on her dignity, and now everything was returned in truth. The Prescotts had nothing left to hide behind. Their empire, once polished and admired, had been reduced to rubble. And through it all, Elena remained standing, stronger than they had ever believed she could be. When the investigators finished their work and the Prescotts' name was ruined, Elena knew there was nothing left for her in that house. She returned the engagement ring to Caleb, placing it gently on the table without a word. He looked at her as if searching for the woman he thought he could control, but she was no longer there. She turned and walked away, her steps steady, her heart lighter than it had felt in months. Life after Caleb was not easy at first. The whispers in society circles followed her, some curious, some doubtful. But Elena chose not to live in those halls of gossip. She poured her energy back into her boutique, the place where her real work had always lived. She opened her doors wider, taking on new clients who valued her skill, not her background. Word spread quickly that her gowns were crafted with unmatched care, and soon her small shop grew busier than ever. The women who once looked down on her began coming through her door with quiet respect. They no longer saw just a seamstress. They saw a woman who had stood against a powerful family and revealed the truth. They admired her strength, even if they never said it out loud. For Elena, that was enough. Her boutique became more than a shop. It became her sanctuary, a place built on honesty and hard work. Each stitch she made carried her story, a reminder that her worth had never been measured by wealth or status. Clients left not just with dresses, but with trust, knowing the woman behind the needle was someone who refused to bend to cruelty or. In the quiet evenings after the shop closed, Elena would sit by the window, watching the city lights flicker. Sometimes her mind returned to the moments of humiliation, The dinner where Vivian mocked her, the silence from Caleb when she needed him most. Those memories no longer hurt. Instead, they reminded her of what she had survived and how far she had risen since then. She realized that being underestimated had given her the space to move unseen. Vivian had thought she was powerless. Caleb had thought she was blind, but both had handed her the weapon she needed, their arrogance. They never imagined she could piece together the truth, never thought she had the courage to use it. Underestimation had been her shield, her cloak, and finally, her strength. Her revenge was not the downfall of the Prescotts, though that had been necessary. Her true revenge was standing tall in her own life, with her dignity untouched. She had not only exposed their lies, she had reclaimed her worth, something no amount of stolen wealth could ever take from her. Elena no longer thought of herself as just a seamstress. She was a woman who had faced betrayal and cruelty, who had stitched her pain into power, and who now walked forward with quiet pride. The Prescotts had lost everything. She had gained herself.